Islam makes significant claims that stand in contrast to the key doctrines of the Bible. To assess these claims, it is necessary to conduct a thorough historical analysis, examining the origins of Islamic teachings in the context of the religious landscape of 7th century Arabia. By comparing these teachings with earlier religious traditions, we can explore whether Islam's foundational narratives were influenced by pre-existing beliefs and how they relate to the historical facts that underlie these faiths. In this analysis, we aim to explore the origins of key Islamic claims, their alignment with or divergence from established biblical doctrines, and the historical context that may have shaped these beliefs. Mecca, in the 6th and 7th centuries, was a thriving commercial center located at the crossroads of key trade routes in the Arabian Peninsula. Due to its strategic location, Mecca attracted traders, pilgrims, and travelers from various parts of the world, including those from the Byzantine Empire, Persia, Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia, and Yemen. This made the city a melting pot of different cultures, languages, and most notably, religious beliefs. Muhammad, who was born into the Quraysh tribe in Mecca, worked as a merchant and traveled widely as part of his trade. Historical records and Islamic traditions affirm his role as a trader before his prophetic mission. Muhammad's exposure to different peoples and cultures through trade would have made him acquainted with a variety of religious traditions, including Judaism, Christianity, and the indigenous Arabian polytheistic beliefs. Mecca was not only a commercial center, but also a religious one. The Kaaba, located in the heart of the city, was a sacred site for Arabs before the advent of Islam. It was a hub for pagan pilgrimage, where people from different tribes and regions would gather for religious rituals, worshiping various deities. Apart from Arabian polytheists, Jews and Christians had also settled in parts of Arabia. According to historical sources, there were Jewish tribes living in Medina and the surrounding regions, and Christians had a presence in areas like Najran and the Byzantine Empire, which was not far from Arabia. This created an environment where Muhammad could have encountered different religious ideas, ranging from monotheistic beliefs about one God, as seen in Judaism and Christianity, to the more diverse polytheistic beliefs of the Arab tribes. In fact, the Quran itself suggests that Muhammad was aware of Jewish and Christian traditions, which were widespread in the region. For example, Surah 365 discusses the differences between the followers of Islam and Jews and Christians, indirectly acknowledging the religious diversity of the time. Say, O people of the Scripture, why do you argue about Abraham, while the Torah and the Gospel were not revealed until after him? Then have you no knowledge? Surah 365. This verse reflects the historical context of Mecca, where different religious groups would have engaged in dialogues and debates about their beliefs. Muhammad's exposure to these diverse groups likely influenced the theological elements of Islam, especially its monotheistic stance and stories about biblical prophets such as Moses, Jesus, and Abraham. Another verse that highlights the convergence of religions in Mecca and the influence this may have had on Muhammad is Surah 262, which acknowledges that Jews, Christians, and Muslims share common ground in worshiping the same God. Indeed, those who have believed and those who were Jews or Christians or Sabians, those who believe in Allah and the Last Day and do righteous work will have their reward with their Lord, and no fear will there be concerning them, nor will they grieve. Surah 2:62. This verse demonstrates the acknowledgement of existing religious communities in the Arabian Peninsula and hints at the convergence of religious ideas that Muhammad would have encountered throughout his life. In assessing the Quran's teachings from a purely historical perspective, it becomes apparent that many of the ideas and stories it espouses are not entirely new or divinely inspired, but rather closely reflect pre-existing beliefs circulating in the religious and cultural environment of the 6th and 7th centuries. The Quran's depictions of figures such as Jesus, Mary, and the nature of God bear strong similarities to earlier Jewish, Christian, and Gnostic traditions, as well as pre-Islamic Arabian beliefs. The Quran's assertion that the Bible is corrupted and that its teachings are unreliable appears increasingly questionable when one considers the historical fact that many of the Quranic teachings are strikingly similar to these earlier sources. From the miraculous birth and childhood of Jesus to the claim that he was not crucified but that it appeared so, the Quran mirrors ideas present in Gnostic Christian texts and early Jewish writings, which predate the Quran. Similarly, the Quran's focus on Mary and the miraculous sustenance of her family aligns closely with apocryphal Christian texts, demonstrating how Islamic beliefs borrow heavily from the rich tapestry of religious traditions already circulating in the region. Moreover, many elements of Islamic practice, such as the Kaaba and the belief in jinn, have clear roots in pre-Islamic Arabian religious customs and pagan practices. Gnosticism was a broad and diverse religious movement that emerged in the first few centuries after Christ, blending elements of early Christianity, Greek philosophy, and Eastern mysticism. Gnostic sects often emphasized secret knowledge, gnosis, as the key to salvation and held radically different views of Jesus Christ compared to Orthodox Christianity. Many Gnostic texts depicted Jesus not as the divine Son of God, but as a purely spiritual being who either did not suffer on the cross or whose crucifixion was an illusion. However, these Gnostic writings were written long after the time of Christ, often in the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE, by groups that had already diverged from the teachings of the apostles. The early church fathers rejected these texts as heretical, recognizing that they contained serious theological errors and were not rooted in the eyewitness accounts of Jesus' life. The Jewish Encyclopedia, in its description of Gnosticism, acknowledges that many Gnostic groups sought to distort Christian teachings by introducing speculative philosophies that diverged from the original message of Christ. Some of these groups were influenced by Jewish mysticism and sought to reinterpret Jesus' role to undermine his divinity. As the Jewish Encyclopedia notes, Gnosticism was not a uniform movement, but rather a collection of sects that shared common features, including a rejection of the God of the Old Testament and an emphasis on esoteric knowledge as a means of salvation. In addition to the influence of Gnosticism, historical evidence suggests that there were concerted efforts by certain Jewish groups to discredit and suppress the spread of Christianity. The early followers of Jesus, most of whom were Jewish, faced strong opposition from the religious authorities in Jerusalem. The New Testament itself records multiple instances of Jewish leaders seeking to silence the apostles and prevent the spread of Christ's message. Acts 4:1-3, Acts 5:17-18, Acts 7:54-60. Beyond physical persecution, some Jewish groups also sought to distort the story of Jesus through alternative narratives that denied his divinity and sought to explain away his miracles. These distortions found their way into various Jewish texts, including the Toledat Yeshu, a medieval anti-Christian polemic that falsely portrays Jesus as an illegitimate child and a magician. While Toledat Yeshu is a much later text, it reflects a broader trend of efforts within Jewish communities to challenge the foundational claims of Christianity. Given the strong presence of Jewish and Christian sects in the Arabian Peninsula during Muhammad's time, it is plausible that he would have encountered these alternative narratives, particularly from Jewish groups who rejected Jesus' messianic status. The Quran's portrayal of Jesus as a mere prophet and its denial of his crucifixion appear to align with these anti-Christian distortions rather than with the historically attested accounts of Jesus' life and ministry. In the following sections, we will explore key examples of these parallels, demonstrating how these earlier beliefs may have influenced the Quranic narrative. The Quran portrays Jesus, Isa, as a prophet of great significance, but it also reflects some misunderstandings of his nature and the theological understanding that Christianity has developed around Christ's life, particularly his divine nature. One such misunderstanding is the Quran's retelling of miracles attributed to Jesus as a child, including his speaking from the cradle and giving life to clay birds. These elements align more closely with certain apocryphal texts rather than the canonical Gospels of the New Testament. The Quran presents an unusual story in Surah 346 and Surah 5110, where Jesus, even as a baby in the cradle, speaks and announces his prophetic role. Jesus will speak to the people in the cradle and in maturity, and will be of the righteous. Surah 346. This miraculous ability to speak from the cradle is not found in the canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Instead, this story closely parallels certain apocryphal accounts, particularly the infancy Gospel of Thomas and other early Christian writings that offer an expanded view of Jesus' childhood. The infancy Gospel of Thomas is a non-canonical text that dates from the 2nd century and provides an imaginative account of Jesus' childhood, which is not found in the New Testament. The text includes several stories of Jesus performing miracles and speaking with divine knowledge from a very young age. In one passage, the young Jesus speaks to his mother, Mary, and others, performing actions that demonstrate his extraordinary power and divine nature. I am not a child of the ordinary sort, for I am the Son of the Most High God. Infancy Gospel of Thomas, Chapter 2. Moreover, in Chapter 1 of the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, there is an account where the infant Jesus speaks directly. And the child said, I am the Son of God, and I am called the Word of God. Infancy Gospel of Thomas, Chapter 1. This portrayal of Jesus speaking from the cradle is one of the most direct similarities to the Quranic narrative, where Jesus in the Quran also declares his prophetic nature even as a baby. While these apocryphal texts do include stories of the speaking child and the miraculous acts of Jesus as a young boy, the New Testament is silent on such matters. The Gospels focus on Jesus' ministry beginning at around the age of 30, with his baptism by John the Baptist marking the beginning of his public ministry. For example, Luke 2:52 simply states, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man." This absence of a miraculous childhood in the canonical Gospels suggests that the stories in the Infancy Gospel of Thomas and similar apocryphal writings were likely later inventions or elaborations that arose outside the Orthodox Christian tradition. These stories may reflect the growing desire to understand Jesus' divine nature from the earliest stages of his life, but do not align with the biblical understanding of Jesus' incarnation, where the focus is on his divinity manifesting in his adulthood. In contrast, the Quranic depiction of Jesus speaking in the cradle and performing miracles, such as giving life to clay birds in Surah 349, further illustrates the Islamic misunderstanding of Jesus' nature. The Quran's portrayal of Jesus as a miraculous figure from birth aligns with these apocryphal narratives, but deviates from the canonical Christian doctrine, which emphasizes Jesus' humility, his incarnation, and his saving work through his death and resurrection. I have come to you with a sign from your Lord. I will create for you from clay the figure of a bird. Then I will breathe into it, and it will be a bird by the will of Allah. Surah 349. In the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, there is a similar narrative where Jesus, as a child, shapes clay into birds and brings them to life. This story is one of many in the Infancy Gospel of Thomas that focuses on Jesus' miraculous powers as a child. And having made clay into 12 sparrows, on the Sabbath day he clapped his hands and said to the sparrows, "Go." And the sparrows took flight and flew away. The Infancy Gospel of Thomas, Chapter 2. The Quran presents Mary, Maryam, in a highly elevated and almost mystical manner, attributing to her miraculous experiences that closely resemble accounts found in early Christian apocryphal and Gnostic writings. While the canonical Gospels view Mary with great respect and honor as the mother of Jesus, they do not portray her in the same extraordinary light as seen in the Quran or certain non-canonical Christian texts. In contrast, the Quran describes Mary receiving direct divine sustenance and being under the care of the prophet Zechariah, a depiction that has strong parallels with earlier Gnostic and apocryphal sources. In the Quran, Mary is said to have lived in the sanctuary, mihrab, where Zechariah would find provisions miraculously provided for her. So her Lord accepted her with good acceptance and caused her to grow in a good manner and put her in the care of Zechariah. Every time Zechariah entered upon her in the prayer chamber, he found with her provision. He said, "O Mary, from where is this coming to you?" She said, "It is from Allah. Indeed, Allah provides for whom He wills without account." Surah 337. This idea of Mary being divinely sustained is not found in the New Testament. The four canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, mention Mary primarily in relation to Jesus' birth, His ministry, and His crucifixion. But they do not depict her as receiving supernatural provisions or being raised in a sacred environment. However, similar miraculous accounts of Mary's childhood appear in apocryphal Christian texts, particularly the Proto-Evangelium of James, circa 2nd century CE, which was widely read among early Christian communities, but was later rejected by the Church for its embellishments and theological inconsistencies. The Proto-Evangelium of James describes Mary as being dedicated to the temple from a young age, where she lived and received sustenance in a miraculous manner. And Mary was in the temple of the Lord as if she were a dove that dwelt there, and she received food from the hand of an angel. Proto-Evangelium of James, chapter 8:2. This account closely mirrors the Quranic description, where Zechariah finds Mary provided for in a way that defies natural explanation. The similarity suggests that Muhammad or his sources were influenced by Christian groups that held to these apocryphal traditions, rather than the teachings of the canonical Gospels. One of the most significant theological differences between Islam and Christianity is the understanding of the death and crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Christianity holds that Jesus' crucifixion and subsequent resurrection are central to salvation, but the Quran presents a radically different view. According to the Quran, Jesus was not crucified or killed, but rather it was made to appear so. This idea resonates with certain Gnostic texts that also assert that Jesus' death on the cross was either illusory or not literal. These beliefs are rooted in early Christian heretical movements, which had complex and sometimes contradictory views about Jesus' nature and the significance of his death. The Quran explicitly denies that Jesus was crucified and asserts that it only appeared to people that he had died. The key verses are found in Surah 4, 157 to 158. The disbelievers said, "Indeed, we have killed the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Mary, the messenger of Allah." But they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him. But another was made to resemble him to them. And indeed, those who differ over it are in doubt about it. They have no knowledge of it except the following of assumption. And they did not kill him for certain. Rather, Allah raised him to himself, and ever is Allah exalted in might and wise. Surah 4, 157 to 158. This verse clearly states that the crucifixion was a misconception, with Allah making someone else appear like Jesus. This interpretation challenges the core Christian belief that Jesus' crucifixion was a necessary act for the salvation of humanity. Instead, the Quran suggests that the events of the crucifixion were not as they seemed, and that Jesus was spared from death, being raised up to Allah. Several Gnostic texts also espouse similar views to the Quran, suggesting that Jesus' crucifixion was either illusory, symbolic, or not literal. These texts were part of early Christian heterodox traditions and reflect a spiritual or non-literal understanding of Christ's death. Below are 3 key Gnostic writings that align with the Quranic view. The Second Treatise of the Great Seth, circa 200 CE. The Second Treatise of the Great Seth is part of the Nag Hammadi Library, a collection of Gnostic texts discovered in Egypt in 1945. This writing is attributed to the figure of Seth, the third son of Adam, and contains teachings on the nature of Christ's crucifixion. In this treatise, Seth, or the voice of the text, describes how Christ was not crucified in the literal sense. But it was they who did not know me, and they thought they had nailed me to a tree. But they did not see me, and they did not even know that I was with them when they did that to me. For I was not crucified, but only appeared to be. The Second Treatise of the Great Seth, chapter 6. This passage clearly parallels the Quranic assertion that Jesus was not crucified, but only appeared to be. The text suggests that the crucifixion was a misconception, with the real spiritual nature of Christ hidden from those who were responsible for his apparent death. The Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter, circa 200 CE. The Apocalypse of Peter is another Gnostic text that describes the suffering of Christ, but diverges from the canonical Gospels in its interpretation of the event. In this text, the crucifixion is presented as an appearance or illusion, emphasizing the idea that the physical death of Jesus was not a necessary part of his divine mission. And I saw the Lord who was put on the cross, and they pierced his side. And I saw the one who was raised up on the tree, but he did not die, and he did not suffer. The Apocalypse of Peter, chapter 10. Similar to the Quranic view, this text describes an apparent crucifixion, but it emphasizes that Jesus did not die or suffer in the way described by the canonical Gospels. Instead, his crucifixion is depicted as a superficial event, one that does not affect his divine nature. Basilides, circa 130 CE. Basilides was an early Christian Gnostic teacher who developed a complex system of theology that rejected the idea of Jesus' physical death and crucifixion. Basilides taught that Christ's suffering and crucifixion were illusory and that someone else took his place on the cross. According to the writings attributed to Basilides, Jesus did not experience the physical suffering attributed to the crucifixion. It was not Christ who suffered for them, but it was one of the celestial beings who appeared to them in his place. The one who suffered was not the true Christ, but a reflection of him. Excerpts from the writings of Basilides. Basilides' teachings align with the Quranic account, as both assert that someone else was made to appear like Jesus and endure the suffering of the crucifixion, while the true Christ remained unharmed and was not subject to death. Both the Quranic account and the Gnostic texts share the belief that Jesus did not die on the cross, but that it was made to appear as if he did. This idea directly challenges the Christian doctrine of atonement, which holds that Jesus' death on the cross was necessary for the salvation of humanity. The Gnostic and Quranic teachings reflect a different understanding of Christ's mission, one that emphasizes his spiritual nature and divine essence, rather than his physical death. The Quranic narrative of Jesus' ascension, where he is raised up to Allah and spared from death, also aligns with the Gnostic view that Christ's mission was not centered on physical suffering or death, but rather on imparting divine knowledge. Both traditions emphasize the illusion of death, underscoring the transcendence and divinity of Christ. The Quranic assertion that Jesus was not crucified, but rather it was made to appear so, has clear parallels with early Gnostic writings, such as the Second Treatise of the Great Seth, the Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter, and the teachings of Basilides. These Gnostic texts present a similar view of the crucifixion as an illusion or as something that did not affect the true spiritual nature of Christ. While Christianity holds the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus as central to its doctrine, the Quran and Gnostic traditions offer alternative views that challenge the physical death of Christ. These differences highlight the contrasting theological perspectives on Jesus' mission and nature, and provide insight into the early debates within Christianity and the development of Islamic teachings. The Islamic view of the figure of Jesus, known in Arabic as Isa, also shares significant similarities with certain early Christian sects and Gnostic traditions that rejected the doctrine of Jesus as the divine Son of God. While mainstream Christian theology developed the belief in Jesus as the literal Son of God, many early Jewish Christian and Gnostic groups held alternative Christologies that denied his divine sonship. Islam, which emerged in the 7th century, presents a view of Jesus that aligns more closely with these earlier traditions than with later Christian doctrine. The Quran firmly rejects the idea that Jesus is the Son of God, emphasizing instead that he was a prophet and messenger. In Surah 4:171, it states, "The Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, was but a messenger of Allah and his word, which he directed to Mary, and a soul from him. So believe in Allah and his messengers. Exalted is he above having a son." This verse not only affirms Jesus' prophetic mission, but also directly refutes the idea of divine sonship. This is strikingly similar to the beliefs held by the Ebionites, a Jewish Christian sect that existed in the first centuries of Christianity. According to early church fathers like Irenaeus and Epiphanius, the Ebionites viewed Jesus as an ordinary man, chosen by God for a special mission, but not pre-existent or divine. They rejected the doctrine of the virgin birth and instead believed that Jesus was the biological son of Joseph and Mary. This perspective is reflected in Surah 575, which states, "The Messiah, son of Mary, was not but a messenger. Other messengers have passed away before him, and his mother was a supporter of truth. They both used to eat food." Here, the Quran underscores Jesus' human nature by pointing out his and Mary's dependence on food, a clear indication that neither were divine. This aligns with the Pseudo-Clementine Homilies, an early Christian text that denounces any attempt to elevate Jesus beyond his role as a prophet. It states, "If anyone should say that Christ is God, let him be anathema." Like the Quran, this text strongly rejects any notion that Jesus is divine, reinforcing the idea that strict monotheism was an early and persistent belief among certain Christian groups. Another early text, the Testament of Levi from the Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs, presents a view of the Messiah that aligns with the Quran's portrayal of Jesus as a divinely appointed figure, but not as a Son of God. This text, written before or around the time of early Christianity, describes a priestly and prophetic figure, but makes no claim of divine sonship. The Quran echoes this view by presenting Jesus as one who confirmed the Torah and brought the gospel, but without attributing divinity to him. In Surah 348, it states, "And he will teach him the book and wisdom, and the Torah, and the gospel." The Acts of Thomas, a Gnostic text from the 3rd century, also presents Jesus in a manner that is distinct from later Christian doctrine. In this text, Jesus is depicted as a revealer of divine wisdom rather than as an incarnate deity. This corresponds with the Quran's depiction of Jesus as a teacher who calls people to worship God alone rather than himself. In Surah 5:116, God addresses Jesus and asks him whether he ever claimed divinity. "And beware the day when Allah will say, 'O Jesus, son of Mary, did you say to the people, take me and my mother as deities besides Allah?' He will say, 'Exalted are you. It was not for me to say that to which I have no right.'" Similarly, the Gospel of Barnabas, a much later apocryphal text that likely reflects earlier Jewish Christian traditions, explicitly denies Jesus' divine sonship. It records Jesus as saying, "I am a man, born of a woman, mortal, and subject to the judgment of God like other men." Although written in the medieval period, this text appears to preserve echoes of earlier non-Trinitarian Christian beliefs that denied Jesus' divine status. The rejection of divine sonship is also found in early Jewish opposition to Christian claims about Jesus. The Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 43a, makes reference to Jesus, but does not ascribe any divine status to him. Instead, Jewish monotheism, particularly among sects like the Pharisees and later Rabbinic Judaism, strongly oppose the idea that God could have a son. The Quran reflects this strict monotheistic stance in Surah 112 verse 3, which states, "He neither begets nor is born." These parallels suggest that the Quranic portrayal of Jesus was not an isolated theological development, but was part of a long-standing tradition of alternative Christologies that existed well before Islam. Jewish Christian groups like the Ebionites, Gnostic traditions, and various apocryphal writings all presented Jesus as a human prophet rather than as the Son of God. The Quran reaffirms and preserves this interpretation, standing in contrast to the later Christian belief in Jesus' divine nature. In conclusion, a historical analysis of the Quran's teachings reveals that many of the doctrines it espouses regarding Christ and other key figures in Christian tradition closely resemble the beliefs that were circulating in the religious environment of the 6th and 7th centuries. These beliefs, many of which were rooted in Gnostic and heretical traditions, were often deliberately crafted to distort the true message of Christ. Gnostic writings, which were abundant in the early centuries of Christianity, were part of a larger movement that sought to reinterpret Christian teachings in ways that were not aligned with the apostolic traditions. These texts, often removed from first-hand accounts and rooted in speculation and esoteric knowledge, contributed to the confusion and fragmentation of early Christian thought. While Islam claims that the Bible has been corrupted, it is ironic that the Quran incorporates elements of these very same Gnostic and apocryphal writings, many of which were known to be forgeries or distortions of the true Christian message. Some of these writings, which were rejected by early church authorities, were not based on eyewitness testimony, and instead presented highly speculative versions of Christ's life, teachings, and mission. These distortions, created by groups with specific theological and political agendas, were part of an ongoing effort to shape religious narratives for their own purposes. Furthermore, this effort to alter and distort the message of Christ was not limited to fringe groups, but was a concern expressed in the early Christian community itself. In the book of Acts, for example, it is warned that some would seek to corrupt the gospel for personal gain, misrepresenting the truth in a way that could lead others astray. This historical context helps us understand why early Christians were so vigilant about preserving the integrity of the message they believed was handed down directly from the apostles. The Quran, by reflecting many of these same distorted teachings, shows how ideas from these Gnostic and heretical traditions continued to influence religious thought long after the rise of Christianity. Rather than representing a wholly new divine revelation, it appears that Islam adapted and incorporated ideas that were circulating at the time, many of which were part of the broader effort to reshape the narrative of Christ. This historical perspective challenges the claim of an entirely uncorrupted or unique revelation in the Quran and raises questions about the origins and development of Islamic teachings in relation to earlier Christian and Gnostic ideas.